The night the road split open, it sounded like the earth took a breath and decided it was done with us. 1 second it was a glossy ribbon stretching across the marsh. The next it was heaving like a bad idea rejecting itself, chunks of asphalt turning sideways and sliding into black water. I was standing on my porch holding a flashlight, and the beam jittered all over because my hands weren't steady and the frogs had gone silent like they knew a secret I didn't want to hear. If you asked me 2 months earlier, I'd have said Cedar Hollow was the kind of place where nothing truly dramatic ever happened. Sprinklers clicked at sunrise. Folks waved from golf carts. The HOA newsletter bragged about pet costume contests. Our houses sat on the edge of Marshlight Preserve, 5 acres of low, breathing land stitched with reeds and the slow coil of a winter river. My dad and I had spent years planting native grasses there, pulling out old tires and cursing at the mosquitoes as we restored it back to something that looked like memory. He's gone now, and that marsh is one of the only promises I kept without needing to say it out loud. Then the board decided a road would look nice through it, a walking path for families. They called it in print. Then an access lane for emergency vehicles, when they thought we wouldn't notice the width and the base layer of crushed rock. The face they put on it was Lydia Cole, a polished woman with flawless hair and a voice that always sounded like a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Her right hand was a guy named Vince, who carried himself like a nightclub bouncer moonlighting as an expert on drainage. The first time I met them about it, Lydia smiled like I was something she'd scrape off a heel and said, "We're embracing progress, Evan. Don't you want property values to rise?" I told her I wanted my land to keep breathing. She said that sounded sentimental, but unhelpful. I went to the county office with a stack of maps. The clerk typed, squinted, and shook her head. No permits on file for construction in a floodplain. Not for our HOA or for anyone named Cole. I went to the board meeting with the letter confirming exactly that, and I got my 3 minutes. Lydia let me finish, then thanked me for my passion, smiled at the row of trustees, and banged the little gavel she liked to keep polished. Vince gave me a smirk over the top of his water bottle, those reusable ones they ordered with the HOA logo and handed out at meetings like party favors. When the gavel came down, my time was done. They moved on to a vendor presenting sustainable lighting for the gazebo. A week later, trucks. I woke up to the sound of gravel pouring into a place that is supposed to absorb water, not hold elevated rock like a crown. I filmed drone overhead, trail cameras along the deer path, dates, times, the whole boring archive you create when you know you're going to have to prove something everyone should feel in their bones. When the driver hopped down, I asked for the permit. Vince stepped in, sunglasses on at sunrise, and waved a laminated sheet that looked like a screenshot printed at Kinko's. "Authorization from the city," he said, like he was handing me a parking pass. "We're good." I sent a photo of it to the county office. The response came back fast. That was a draft template, not a signed approval. Any signature had been lifted, not issued. I forwarded that to the board and got a reply from Lydia's assistant about how emails were best addressed to the general inbox for record keeping. I printed every single one. Around then, a neighbor named Jenny started knocking. "My kid's sandbox is a soup," she said, pointing at her backyard where the ground sloped toward the new road like a cracked plate. Mr. Morales, who's lived here long enough to talk about a '96 flood with the patience of a man who's rebuilt before, brought over a newspaper clipping and set it on my kitchen table. He tapped the headline that said, "Road washouts raise flood fears," and told me the land keeps its own calendar. I believe that. I always have. There was rain on the radar, a tropical system curling up like a fist. The county posted advisories, sandbags showed up at the fire station, and our HOA newsletter went out with glossy photos of kids in t-shirts and the headline, "Our future is connected." Lydia did a live stream walking the new road in canvas sneakers, calling it Our Green Corridor. Comments floated up from residents. Hearts, clapping hands, a few skeptical frowns. I typed, "Where's the permit?" and hit send. The comment vanished. Comments are limited to keep things constructive, her caption said. After the night of the emergency meeting, the rain already had weight to it. I carried in a coil of rolled maps and a jar of soil from the marsh. The fine silt, my father loved the way it clung together like a small, quiet argument. Lydia stood at the front with her gavel, Vince cross-armed behind her, and the trustees in a tidy row with printed agenda packets. People filled the folding chairs, wet umbrellas dripping on the tile, voices low like church before a service goes sideways. I didn't raise my voice. I laid out the maps that showed flood paths, the water lines from older storms, the county's letter about permits. Somewhere in the second row, where I know there's always at least one skeptic who wants more than vibes, someone leaned forward. I watched Lydia scan the room, her smile slipping at the edges like a sticker in the rain. "This is alarmism," she said, then glanced at the window as thunder frayed the sentence. "We've taken every precaution." She adjourned abruptly after that, and people folded their chairs slowly, like leaving would mean admitting the weather could make decisions for us. The storm arrived with that old southern rhythm, steady, then slanting, then steady again, like it had all night to insist. I don't remember deciding to keep watch, but there I was at midnight under the porch light, barefoot, camera in my pocket, feeling the ground tremble in a way that didn't feel like thunder. The culvert they installed was too narrow anyone could see that if they'd looked at the way a marsh swells. Water pressed and coughed, then it spit. The first crack raced across the asphalt like a zipper opening. Another followed. The blacktop lifted at the center line, sagged at the edges, shrugged once, then whole slabs slid into the water with a sound I felt in my teeth. The road was going back to where it came from. Sirens threaded through the rain. A county truck's lights spun red on cattails, which looked like a cheap horror effect until you remembered this was what happens when people pretend they're smarter than a wetland. Lydia showed up at some point in a trench coat, mascara and runnels, telling a sheriff's deputy this was private property. He didn't even bother to take his hands out of his pockets when he told her public safety trumps private tantrums. Vince stood with his arms out like he could corral a river by telling it to mind its tone. I filmed. Somebody from Channel 7 pointed a microphone at me in the wash of their headlights, and I said the one sentence I knew in my bones. We warned the mover, and overend they built anyway. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was tired. There's a difference. By dawn, the road was a series of jagged islands where frogs and dragonflies hovered like they were waiting for us to be done. The HOA website blamed an act of God and suggested the water had surged from adjacent land where the owner altered the natural flow. I laughed so hard I saw spots. Then a woman I didn't know very well, a board member named Tara who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, walked up my driveway with a tote bag under her arm and a look on her face like she'd just confessed something to herself, and it felt terrible but clean. She didn't even say hello before she emptied the bag onto my table mails, meeting minutes, screenshots of texts. One line froze me. Nobody checks floodplains unless someone complains. Stay ahead of optics. Another message showed Vince telling the vendor to bulldoze and beg forgiveness, with a winky face. Tara held her coffee with both hands so they wouldn't shake, and said, "I can't be part of it anymore." The emergency meeting after the collapse didn't look like a ribbon cutting. People were water in their garages, kids' bikes crusted with mud, fences leaning like sad drunks. Lydia tried to smile. It wobbled. She suggested a special assessment to rebuild the corridor, words that sounded fake next to the smell of wet drywall and fuel. Jenny stood up, voice shaking, and said the word sandbox. Mr. Morales stood up and said the year 96, and every person in that room who'd been around then exhaled like muscle memory. Tara raised her hand and said she had something to share. She handed the stack to the deputy standing at the back. You could feel the air change, the way a room sucks in breath before a storm does the rest. The county wrote it up by noon. No permits. Forged authorization. Violations stacked like bad bets, construction in a protected zone, improper culvert installation, failure to file environmental impact assessments. The papers ran the photo of the road ripped open like a zipper and called it a cautionary tale. I call it what it is, the land remembering. Court isn't like television. It's slow and maddening and precise. It makes you want to stand up and shake everyone until they admit what a photograph already told you. But we went, we sat, we listened, exhibits submitted, drone footage played, the hollow chunk of asphalt in a cardboard box passed around like a stupid trophy. The defense said weather, said confusion, said miscommunication between city and HOA. The judge, a calm woman with a face that didn't do much even when attorneys tried to make it react, asked two questions that cut everything down to bone. Who signed this? Finger on the fake permit, and what flood study did you rely on? They didn't have answers that survived daylight. The ruling came down like a shoulder relaxing. Construction without approval liable. Environmental violations liable. Personal responsibility, not just corporate cover assigned to both Lydia and Vince, who had acted knowingly. Fines, restitution, a restoration order under county supervision, and a permanent injunction. No development within 300 feet of the marsh, period. I watched Lydia as the judge spoke. For the first time, she didn't look like a woman performing reassurance. She just looked small, like someone who'd believed a smile could keep gravity at bay. We rebuilt, but not like they wanted. The county oversaw crews that pulled out the broken road and the rotten culvert. Then they brought in teams who knew how to listen, a hydrologist who talked about catchment like it was a language, a botanist who lit up when dragonflies returned, laborers who sank seed with their palms and didn't mind working ankle-deep in mud. The new board, headed by a teacher named Amina and a contractor named Paul, started posting meeting agendas online where comments stayed up even when they stung. They brought folding chairs out into the park and took questions until the stars came out, and you could hear the marsh breathe again. A month later, on a clear morning that felt like a first day of school, Jenny and her son carried a small wooden sign they'd made in their garage. He'd painted the letters crooked on purpose, a kid's act of rebellion against the HOA fonts we'd been force-fed for years. We walked it out to the edge of the reeds with Mr. Morales and a handful of neighbors, and we set it into the ground together. The sign said Pike Morales Preserve, because I refused to put only my family's name on something that had protected all of us, and because Mr. Morales had been right when he said the land keeps its own calendar. I pressed my palm to the wood and felt the sun warm through. A red-winged blackbird did the little power slide they do across the cattails and let out a sound that felt like a punchline and a prayer at once. As for Lydia, she sold her house at a loss and left in a moving van that didn't stop for anyone's wave. Vince disappeared, and you can decide for yourself whether that means he learned anything or just took his sunglasses somewhere else. Tara sits on the new board now, and when she speaks there's a pause afterward where people make space for the idea that changing your mind in public is one of the bravest things you can do. I tell this now not because I like the sound of my own voice, but because I want to leave a record as plain as a weather report. We were told progress, and what they meant was control. We were told our future, and what they meant was a shortcut to a shiny photo in a newsletter. We were told act of God, and what they meant was this isn't our fault. But God didn't sign a permit. A person did or pretended to. And when the road went under, no slogan climbed out to save it. No smile kept it from opening along an old seam like a scar the earth refused to forget. Sometimes, late, I sit on the porch and let the night wash past me, the marsh alive with the small congress of things that never needed our approval to exist. I think about my father's hands, stained from pulling trash out of water that deserved better. I think about how close we came to believing a brochure that told us we could pave our way to safety. And I think about the moment the road breathed out and gave up, how the silence just before sounded like a warning and a mercy all at once. If you were here, I'd hand you the jar of soil and ask you to tilt it in the light. Watch how it moves, how it clings and releases, how it remembers where it came from. I'd ask you to tell me if you think I was right to push as hard as I did, or if there's a world where progress could have meant something different. I'd ask you what justice looks like when a community learns that power and wisdom don't live in the same house. And I'd ask you to think about your own neighborhood, the simple way a place breathes when we stop trying to force it into a picture. Now it's your turn. Was the board wrong from the jump? Or do you think they truly believed they were helping and just got blinded by control and ego? Should leaders who falsified documents face personal consequences? Or does the whole community share the blame for letting the smile and the gavel do the thinking? Drop your take in the comments. Call it right, call it wrong. Argue with me, argue with each other. Just keep it honest. And if you've ever watched a place you love push back against people who claim to love it too, tell me that story. Share this with someone who thinks wetlands are just empty space, because sometimes the land isn't empty at all, it's full of memory, and it will make sure we remember too.